All right, so we are going to talk about the five most underrated Big Ten Heisman contenders. We'll go through the odds right now. These are the FanDuel odds. Dylan Gabriel is first in the Big Ten at plus 280. Kurtis Rourke at plus 2,000. Will Howard at plus 15,000. Drew Aller tied with Will Howard at plus 15,000. Jeremiah Smith at plus 15,000, tied with them, and then Caleb Johnson rounds it out at plus 30,000 there. Zach, let's go back and forth. You can use guys on the odds list here if you want to, or you can use other guys. Let's go back and forth. I'm going to let you go first on your fifth player that should be considered for the Heisman out of the Big Ten.
So we're going 5-1.
Yeah, so five is like least likely. One is like this guy should be considered for the Heisman. I'm not going to use Dylan Gabriel just because he's already up there at the top. It doesn't mean I don't think he should be a Heisman guy. It's just I think his name's already up there. But you can use him if you want.
Okay. Well, I gave my 5 most likely. That's kind of how I thought about it. But
that's fine.
Number 5, I have Will Howard.
Okay.
I feel like he has higher odds. I think the problem is I think nobody is going to give him the credit because he has all the playmakers. Like a lot of people just say, "Oh, he doesn't need to be great." It's like, well, then is he really going to be considered?
Right.
So like, I think if he like the next 4 games, if he goes off and say he has like 5 touchdowns a game, throws for 300 plus yards a game and runs for 50, like that changes things, and then has a big Big Ten championship game. But I think he's actually farther back behind the pack because I think of the perception that he's really there just to steady the ship.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I think for me, my number 5 is going to be it's going to be actually Tai Felton from Maryland. I know he hasn't been great the past few weeks, but he's had a really good season. He's put together the game log, hasn't looked great lately, but what he was able to do at the beginning of the season, he's had 100-yard receiving games in 5 in 5 of their 8 games. He has had all kinds of touchdowns in almost every single game, but 3, I mean, it's been hard for him with how much teams are going after him, but the fact that this guy doesn't even have odds or anything like that, I mean, it speaks to Maryland not being a contender at all, but yeah. I think this guy's having a really, really good season and somebody that's being underrated. Almost 1,000 yards receiving on the year already.
Yeah. That's insane. He's really good.
He is.
Really good.
Is. All right, your next one.
4 is Tyler Warren. I think the fact that he's so heavily utilized in different packages is going to be attractive. Like just like how teams talk about Travis Hunter. Like obviously he's not getting the same publicity, but I think he's the best tight end in the country. They use him in so many different spots. Like people were clamoring for him to get a touch in the red zone at the goal line because they know he's the best player. So I think he is like I thought he was my midseason player of the year in the Big Ten. He's so good. But I'm also aware that he's not going to get as much publicity because he's a tight end.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good pick. My next one, this one might shock some people, but man, he's having a really, really good season. IU fans, I know maybe I love IU a little bit too much right now, but give me Mikel Kamara, the defensive end for Indiana. 9.5 sacks so far this season. He has had a sack in each of the past 5 games, 7.5 sacks in the past 5 games. I know he's not up there because of the schedule, yada, 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 but there is nobody that is more of a menace right now to opposing offensive lines more than Mikel Kamara. I think that he is fantastic. I wanted to put a defensive player on this list. I wanted to get at least one on there because we're talking about underrated guys. I mean, he has just been fantastic, and against this Michigan offensive line, I don't see it letting up anytime soon. This Michigan offensive line is not very good in pass protection. He could have another big game in this one. Watch for Kamara to possibly get 2, 3, maybe even 4 sacks in that game.
I clearly misunderstood this assignment because when I was thinking about it, I was like not thinking about under the radar guys. I was just thinking, oh, who Big Ten best
That's okay.
odds?
I like
So
that we're kind of going at it different ways because we have
yeah,
different guys. We're not just naming the same guy back and forth.
yeah. Kamara is a beast. He's really good. So in my non underrated list, I have Caleb Johnson 3.
Yeah.
And it's actually amazing that he's 3 and only 3 because the dude is ridiculous. 170 carries, 1,279 yards. He has 19 touchdowns. Like, that's insane. Like, he's just having a ridiculous season. And, like, I think I'm just going to look up the stats real quick for running. He's second in the country in rushing yards. I believe he's second in the country in total touchdowns. He's second in rushing average, rushing per carry. Like, all of that's to Ashton Genty. And the only reason why he's not getting more buzz is because Iowa is 6-3, and that is not his fault. That is Cade McNamara's fault. So if there's a bad worst player in the world or player that drags everybody down
In the world.
I'm putting Cade McNamara at the top of that list.
There's a worse player in the world. I love that. All right,
No
we're on
offense,
number three, correct?
Number 3.
Okay, my number 3 is actually also Caleb Johnson. So, I mean, just echoing everything that you said, I think that there's a lot of running backs right now in like the SEC and stuff like that that people are falling all over for. Dylan Sampson being one at Tennessee. They're talking about Jarquez Hunter a little bit here and there, but I mean, Caleb Johnson, this guy is basically doing what Ashton Genty is doing with a Mountain West schedule and stuff like that, with a Big Ten schedule. These are much better defenses than Ashton Genty is seeing. And I'm not trying to take away from Ashton Genty. I know he's having a historic season, and I actually really like Ashton Genty, so I'm not trying to go at him at all. I'm just saying, you look at the stats, you look at like the breakaway percentage, you look at the big runs, you look at him and how he's able to get yards after contact, breaking tackles, all that stuff. His numbers are on par with Ashton Genty. The only problem he has is he's not at a group of 5 school that is going to possibly make the playoffs. I mean, if he was at a group of 5 school doing this and going to make the playoffs, he'd be getting all the love because he'd have the national level. But you're completely right. He has a quarterback that brought him down, and he's not being considered nearly enough because this team should be a playoff contender, but they aren't because they didn't go with Brendan Sullivan early enough in the season.
Yep. Just to your point too about the schedule, Boise State, their strength of schedule is 70th in the country. Iowa's, believe it or not, is a fairly strong 38th, which actually is ahead of Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Miami, not Tennessee. Iowa's got a stronger strength of schedule than people realize, at least according to the numbers.
I mean, you think about what they've done and who they played against. They played against Ohio State, which, I mean, obviously is no slouch in that one. I'm trying to look up the rest of their schedule. I mean, Wisconsin, that last game, I know people are going to look down on them after the game, but it wasn't bad. Washington's getting top 25 votes, and they beat them. They played against them. Minnesota should be a ranked team. Iowa State is up there around top 10. I don't remember if they're top 10 after this week or not, but yeah, I mean, it's been a pretty tough schedule.
Yep.
So, do you have number 2?
I do. My number 2 is Kurtis Rourke. Kurtis Rourke is the man. And I actually struggled between him and Gabriel for number 1. And so I give away my number 1, but my number 2 is Kurtis Rourke. My number 1 is Dylan Gabriel. Yeah. And I think part of it is just Oregon's the best team in the country right now. And I think he gets the nod there, but I would love to see Kurtis Rourke be in New York. And I think he should be. Regardless of what happens in Columbus, I think Kurtis Rourke should be in New York with what he's doing with this Indiana team.
Rourke in New York. I like it.
Yeah.
All right, my second, I guess I'll go second and first. My second is actually Will Howard from Ohio State, and I'm not
Mm,
trying to be a homer here, but he does have a really good QBR. He just had the moment against Penn State where it's not going to show up on the stat sheet. Stat sheet wise, he's going to look bad, right? He had the fumble into the end zone, that kind of stuff. But I mean, if we're looking at players and what they mean to their team, what they bring to their team, obviously Will Howard is not the best player on Ohio State, but looking in years past what he's done for this team, for the juice, the toughness, all that kind of stuff. It's evident what he has done has been so
mhm,
huge for this team this year as a leader, everything else. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but for me, like if you're actually watching college football and appreciating, not just going through and looking at the stats, but actually appreciating what's going on, I think you have to look at Will Howard and what he's doing.
mhm.
And then my number one is your number two, Kurtis Rourke. Kurtis Rourke is not getting nearly enough consideration for the Heisman right now. On FanDuel, he is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He is the sixth highest behind Jackson Dart and Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward are the only three quarterbacks in front of him. Now look, Jackson Dart is leading the nation in passing yards right now, right? He is going out there and getting a lot of passing yards and stuff like that. But let's also be sure to look at against Furman, he had 400 plus passing yards. Against Middle Tennessee, he had nearly 400 passing yards. Against Wake Forest, he had nearly 400 passing yards and a pick. Against Georgia Southern, he had nearly 400 passing yards. Like, yeah, you should be leading the nation when you play that much of a cupcake out of conference schedule your first 4 games of the season. And then what does he do the very first time he sees good competition? And I say good competition and like a 3-5, 3-6 Kentucky team. 261 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks, but he was sacked 4 times in that game. A couple weeks later, he sees competition at LSU, a team that Miller Moss tore apart, right? I mean, Miller Moss completely took them apart. Now, granted, it was at LSU. I'm going to give them credit there, but 284 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, 6 sacks. I don't know, man. In the biggest games of the season, when CJ Stroud didn't perform, everybody said, oh, he can't be the Heisman contender because he's not performing in the biggest games of the season. But apparently that doesn't work for Jackson Dart because Jackson Dart can go out there in the SEC and beat up on an Arkansas team that everybody knows is terrible, right? Arkansas is not a good team. Everybody knows this is not a good team. They have a playmaker at quarterback that can occasionally do some things for him to win games, and he throws for 500 yards in that one. Everybody falls out of the chair. Oh my gosh, praise Jackson Dart. Yeah, okay. If we were letting quarterbacks in the Big Ten like Kurtis Rourke go out there and throw for 400 plus yards and all their out of conference games and stuff like that, it'd be feeling a whole lot better for them too. So I mean,
Yeah.
I still think Kurtis Rourke needs the big moment against Ohio State to really be considered, heavily for the award. But it's blatant hypocrisy at this point that
Yep.
you're looking at Jackson Dart and saying, "Oh yeah, passing leader in college football," and it's like, well, yeah, he's a passing leader in college football because he beat up on terrible teams. Like,
Yeah.
what
Well,
are we
and
doing
and
here?
that's the way their offense is run. Like if we're
Right,
being honest, like Indiana, as much as great as Curtis Rourke has been, he plays in a complementary offense. Like
right,
that run game has been like they've not felt the need to just be pass happy, which is not what Ole Miss is. And like Ole Miss has struggled at like Ole Miss has 2 losses.
right,
Like they're on the verge of missing out on the playoff. They probably are going to miss the playoff.
right.
Like Indiana's not. Like honestly, one of the biggest benefits of this weekend was I think it really did clear the way for 4 playoff teams for the Big Ten.
Yeah. As long as Indiana only loses once or not at all, and as long as Penn State doesn't lose another time, they should for sure have 4 playoff teams. I think you get a little iffy if Penn State loses to Minnesota. You get a little iffy,
Yeah.
and I don't think it should be iffy. But if Indiana loses to Ohio State, you know
Yeah.
the voters
It
are always
gets
weird.
it gets a little weird. But yeah, so I
Um, Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna bring up one more guy really fast. The other guy I'm gonna bring up because everybody's talking about he's the Heisman favorite right now, and that's what everybody's knocking Kurtis Rourke for right now. Is he can't be the Heisman favorite because he doesn't play the best schedule. Well, Zach, you tell me. I'm gonna read Miami's schedule really fast, and if you don't mind, pull up the strength of schedule. I haven't looked at it between Indiana and Miami because I would bet they're pretty similar. At Florida, Florida A&M, that's an FCS team. Ball State, South Florida, or out South Florida, Virginia Tech, at Cal, at Louisville, Florida State, Duke. 0 ranked teams, a lot of teams with losing records, teams that aren't in the FBS. Like, what are we doing here?
Yep.
We're just going to award this guy for throwing 5 touchdowns against Duke? Like, it's the team that Mike Wright threw touchdowns against. Like,
Ooh,
I
that's hardball right there.
This is a guy that had a -1 QBR at one point in his career, and he's throwing touchdowns against Duke. And we're going to give Cam Ward all this praise. You know who he didn't throw any touchdowns against? Florida State. 0 touchdowns against them, sacked 4 times. In the last 5 games, Zach, are we just not going to care about if a quarterback gets sacked all the time and holds on to the ball forever? 9, 13, 15 sacks in the last 5 games. 15 sacks. That's an average of 3 sacks per game. You tell me anybody that wants their quarterback being sacked 3 times. And then, of course, he's throwing the ball 50, 32, 35, 41. He's throwing the ball so many different times. They have no running attack. Somebody put in the chat earlier, one of the reasons why Rourke isn't getting the consideration is because he does have a running attack with him. I hate that this award is all stats based. I wish people would actually watch what is going on in the field. It's like what I talked about with Will Howard. You actually watch what's going on on the field with Kurtis Rourke. He is throwing the ball over the middle. He is throwing dots on the sidelines. He's throwing the deep ball better than anybody else right now in the country. What he is doing is better than anybody else, but of course, since he's not throwing the ball 50 times a game, he's not getting the 400 plus yard games, and so people aren't considering him for the Heisman as much. Now, I did say he has the 6th highest Heisman odds, so we're gonna give him credit there, but there is no reason why. You look at the play, not just the numbers, but you look at the play. Cam Ward has not been better than Kurtis Rourke.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably had a little bit more excitement because he's been in
right,
those
and that's the
games.
part of it, right? The exciting plays and we're scrambling. It's the same thing with Bryce Young. Bryce Young was not the best player that year when he won the Heisman, but of course he rolled out more than anybody else and threw on the run. So give him the award.
I think the issue too is like Miami. Well, I'll say this: Kurtis Rourke has the opportunity to make bigger statements than Cam Ward ever will, because I mean, you look at Miami's schedule. They play Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. That's the end of their schedule. So their best opponent will be number 25 Louisville at the end of the day. And they don't play Pitt, they don't play Clemson, they don't play SMU. Those are your other ranked teams in the ACC, except maybe in the ACC championship game. And like I'm sorry, SMU being your number 2 team in that conference just reeks of how bad your conference is.
Yep.
Like now, I will say it's interesting. Miami is 54th in strength of schedule, while Indiana is 81st. But that's not taking into account that they play number 40 Michigan, according to Sagarin, number 2 Ohio State, according to Sagarin, and then Purdue, which they're like in the hundreds because Purdue sucks. So Purdue yeah. So Purdue is 109th, by the way. They're ranked worse than Sam Houston State, UC Davis, Montana.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
Fire Ryan Walters right now.
That's embarrassing.
The second worst team is Northwestern at 79. They're a full 30 spots higher.
Nope. Don't like that. Don't like that team's in the Big Ten. Get them out. Put them in the MAC. 4th worst team in the MAC.
Wait, I'm very curious. For John Jacobs, I'm just going to look this up for a minute. Where's Kent State? Kent State on this. Kent State. Oh, I have to be looking for a while. Wow.
What's the point spread on Kent State versus Purdue?
That's a really good question.
Neutral site.
Can we look that up on FanDuel?
Purdue -7. I don't know.
It might be a pick'em. Let's see. I'm
The Boiler
not
Express guys are
finding.
gonna hate it if they come in.
Yeah. Russ, I'm sorry. DK, I'm sorry.
At least they know it though. They're not arguing. They know it.
Let me see if I can find it here.
Yeah. So anyway, while you look that up, I wanted to do the Heisman on things because I feel like Kurtis Rourke is getting so much hate for not playing a tough enough schedule, and he missed that one game, so his numbers don't look as good, and he's not throwing the ball 50 times a game, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous that you got guys like Jackson Dart and Cam Ward in front of him. Dylan Gabriel, how is he not the leader for the Heisman in odds right now? The dude went to the defending national champions and tore them apart. He also had Ohio State at home and had the game-winning touchdown run. Like does it only matter numbers now? Like I thought at one point it was like what you did in the big games and stuff like that, but apparently that doesn't matter anymore. Dylan Gabriel should be far and away the Heisman favorite right now if we're considering that stuff. But of course, Cam Ward throws for a lot of yards because he throws 50 times a game, and people fall in love with that.
I feel like part of it too, and this would go down a rabbit trail that we don't have time for. There is a reality.
We barely have time for what we're doing right now.
Yeah, there's a reality that most players being talked about for the Heisman tend to play on a 4-letter network that no longer gets to air the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't trust the CFP committee either, because the CFP is owned by ESPN. So
really the only one in the top 5 that doesn't is Travis Hunter, but that's because he's Colorado. And
yeah, but like Colorado can still be on ESPN. Like they still have some rights.
Oh yeah, they can be. I know Fox plays the Colorado games more.
Yeah.